A leading African scientist and clinical research innovator has been named on the TIME 100 Health 2026 list, and that's a global recognition of the world's most influential people shaping the future of health. Dr. Tariro Makadzange is the founder of the Africa Clinical Research Network, or ACRN, an organization that's working hard to expand Africa's role in global clinical trials and build world-class African-led research systems across the continent. Her work focuses on strengthening trial sites, digital infrastructure, and as well as partnerships so that Africa isn't just a participant in global health innovation, but a leader in designing and delivering it. She says that this recognition reflects a collective African effort to build a more inclusive and globally representative model for clinical research. Well, she joins us now to talk a little bit more about this recognition as well as her work. Tariro, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.
And congratulations on being named on this Time 100 Health 2026 list. What an honor. What does it mean for you?
Thank you, Peter. It is truly an honor to be included among an amazing group of innovators, healthcare leaders, policy leaders. So it was truly an honor for the work that we are doing as ACRN to be part of this recognition and see the recognition of the work of several leaders on the continent as well.
You've said that this recognition is all about a collective mission. So, who across the continent do you believe this honor is about?
Yeah, I think it is a collective mission. So, over the last few decades, there have been a number of investments around strengthening clinical research infrastructure on the continent. And that has meant that a number of incredible sites have developed all the way from, West Africa, Senegal, through to East Africa, Southern Africa, that have made pioneering contributions to infectious diseases. So a lot of what we know about HIV has been developed on the continent. And many of those are now really looking at how do we transform this research agenda that was globally funded, focused on infectious diseases, to help the continent much more broadly and meet all of our unmet healthcare needs. So this is a recognition of the clinicians, the researchers, the investigators, and increasingly the regulators on the continents, the ministries of health, and what we hope ultimately the policymakers on the continent are starting to create that enabling environment that puts science, innovation, research at the forefront of our national agendas and our national economic growth strategies.
And for our listeners across the continent, how significant is it to see through you, actually, African-focused clinical research being recognized globally in this way?
It is very significant. As I often remind folks, we're about 20% of the world's population, but only contribute about 3-4% of global clinical research, clinical trials, scientific output. So we're punching well below our weight, and I think we could punch much, much higher. So I think this is the start, the recognition that Africa is ready. We really want to be the leaders of science and innovation, particularly in healthcare globally. And this is the start of many of us catalyzing, laying the seeds for that change on the continent.
And on that point, I mean, you argue that Africa is often treated as an endpoint for innovation that's developed elsewhere. So, what's been missing in the traditional global research model?
Yeah, I think for us as a continent, so I'm going to focus more on what we should be doing more and more. For us as a continent, we haven't made the necessary investments that we need to make in science and innovation, whether it is dedicating national budgets to research, whether it's strengthening how we train young people in STEM, in our universities where doing an excellent job of training professional scientists, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, etc. But it's also important for us to increasingly focus on training innovative scientists, your chemists, biochemists, physicists, mathematicians, etc., who are focused on how do we create solutions for our local environment that lead to industries, lead to jobs, and enable us on the continent to be innovators. So not just consumers of therapeutics, technology, innovation, but really driving the innovation, particularly to address our local needs, which will ultimately also be globally relevant. So,
I think you've partly answered my next question, and I'm looking at Africa Clinical Research Network. What is it that you're doing? And in simple terms for our listeners, what is it that you're doing now and building that didn't exist before?
yeah. So what we're building is a network of sites on the continent that can do clinical research and trials and ultimately de-risk doing trials on the continent. So part of the reason we're a relatively small contributor to global clinical trials is that global industry is not aware of the capabilities on the continent, is uncertain of how to work on the continent, fears the fragmented regulatory space. We have about 54 plus countries, each has their own regulator, each has their own processes. So we really want to focus on how do we de-risk doing trials on the continent. And just as Australia, Europe have attracted research to their continent and their countries, we want to do the same in Africa. And our focus is around that site network, de-risk doing trials on the continent. The second thing that we are very passionate about is how do we use technology and leverage technology to enable Africa to leapfrog in this space. We haven't had this industry for the last 3 to 4 decades. We're fortunate that we're building this now as technology is increasingly available. The cost of intelligence and is starting to decrease. There's a lot of opportunity for us as Africa to build out this industry in a way that is agile, technology focused, and helps us be very competitive in this space. The third thing we're focused on is building that community engagement and trust. So really understanding our stakeholders broadly, all the way from governments, policymakers, to the very communities that we're hoping health interventions can serve. So that strong focus and community engagement is really core to our DNA. And then lastly, we see this space as not just a charity philanthropy space. We want to grow this as a life sciences business on the continent. We look at places like China or Australia or other areas where governments have said this is a key component of economic growth. If you don't do science and innovation, if you don't develop therapeutics, you cannot have a robust economy. So we're really looking at how can we as ACRN contribute to building this industry on the continent beyond philanthropy, beyond global health, and truly meeting the healthcare needs for the continent.
So, explain to me, perhaps in practical terms, what it means to design and lead our own clinical trials instead of perhaps just hosting them.
Mhm. Yeah, so in practical terms, it's having strong regulators that are agile and stringent as well, so that protocols that investigators on the continent or global investigators submit are reviewed rapidly, predictably, and efficiently. It also means African scientists being able to do both, so service and work with global partners in global clinical trials, but also be able to use that same trial infrastructure, regulatory environment to test innovations that are homegrown. So practically on the ground, it really is about delivering trials at a cost-efficient, effective manner that's conscious of time and really importantly, conscious of quality. Our industry is a quality industry. Everybody wants to be able to trust the data, know that participants were handled safely, data was handled safely, transparently, and efficiently. So the day-to-day is really focused on that execution, that quality, that timely approach, and that cost competitive approach.
So, Kofi in Ghana, Tunde in Nigeria, Farai in Harare, Jabu in Soweto is listening and they're thinking, this sounds great, but what does it mean for me as a patient, perhaps, and maybe even our
Right.
health systems across the continent?
So as Jabu or Farai, if you're unwell and say have a medical condition, you are going to need a therapeutic to treat you. So HIV is an easy example that I think many of us can relate to, but it's the same for breast cancer, for sickle cell disease. You'll need a drug, a medication to treat your condition. But if that drug or medication was studied somewhere else in a population that's different from your population, maybe you metabolize drugs differently based on your genetics. Maybe your environment is different. You have a different nutritional status. There's a whole host of differences. You're assuming that the data that came from, for example, North America is the same as the data that applies to you as Jabu or Farai. And so in many ways, when we need healthcare, we're really relying on data and processes that are not locally driven. So what it means for patients on the ground is the more that we engage in research, the better that we are as scientists, clinicians, to have data that applies to Jabu and Farai. And that engagement has really enabled the development of therapies. So for HIV, for example, all of us are highly privileged by the individuals in the 80s, 90s, all the way to today, the individuals in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Kenya, who have enrolled in clinical trials to study long-acting antivirals. Those drugs for prevention, for treatment, would never reach the market if people had not done those clinical trials, had not been part of those studies. So what it means for an individual is you have better drugs that work well for you, that make sense in your environment. And for the healthcare system, we have therapies that improve lives and help people be healthier and happier as well.
I was very excited during the COVID period when I heard that there were Zimbabwean researchers that were involved in developing the a vaccine. I think it was at Pfizer. But at the same time, I just kept on thinking it's all very well for our skills and our knowledge to be used over there. I suppose what you're doing is going to be able to create a lot of opportunities for doctors, scientists, research institutions, so that we don't have to be sitting in Boston or in London, that we can do it in Nairobi and Johannesburg and Harare.
That's exactly what I hope for, Peter, and I think that's really an important example. We have a lot of talent on the continent and a lot of talent in science on the continent, but we haven't created the right environment for that science to thrive. So if you are a young Farai who wants to be an innovative scientist, it's very difficult to do that on the streets of Harare today or the streets of Lagos today. So a lot of our talent readily moves to the global West and makes important contributions and globally important contributions. What we also need to do on the continent and really encourage our leaders to do this is to start investing in science. If you look at our Western countries, the way you grow a strong economy is by supporting science and technology. So in the US, the NIH, the National Science Foundation, China is doing that at an incredible rate and pace. And until you do that, you cannot solve industrial problems, mining problems, agriculture problems, health problems. So that investment in science is so important so that our young people don't have to go to Boston to do the science and the innovation that their talent really wants them to do. So we hope as ACRN we can start to catalyze that in our small way, but we can only amplify this if our leaders recognize that we have to build the enabling environment locally so that our talent is solving solutions locally that will help all of us on the continent.
So, if we all do the right things, the authorities, the scientists, the entrepreneurs, if we all do the right things, what do you think success will look like in the next 10, 15, 20 years for us?
I think if we do the right things, Africa will be an incredibly exciting place to be. One of our biggest assets is that we have the youngest population in the world. And that is an asset if we equip that young population with science, technology, and education. I'm struck by the India model where they have invested significantly in education. And so globally, people outsource for talent in India. Similarly, we have a young population that if we made the investments in education, and with the aging population globally, we could, as Africa, be the epicenter of innovation and technology in health and in many, many other sectors. So for me, I would love in 20 years' time, where Africa is not only increasing the percentage of global clinical trials done in Africa, but we have more phase 1 studies being done in Africa. So that's the first step of any clinical development, but not only being done in Africa, but being therapeutics that are developed by Africans on the continent. What we're building as ACRN, yes, for now, may serve a global clinical research industry, but our vision and goal is that in 20, 30 years' time, that innovation is coming directly from Africa and supporting African industries. It sounds a little crazy right now, but I honestly believe that it's doable. And when I look at China 20, 30 years ago, they weren't leading in innovative drugs. And today there are more and more phase 1 drugs coming out of China. So for me, success is ACRN catalyzing, exciting the continent about science, technology, exciting our leaders about what they need to do. And right now, we're not asking them to give money or to put money aside in their budgets, which they should do, but start to create the policies, the enabling environment that makes Africa competitive, and start to see this as a critical way for growing our economies and sustaining our future as a continent.
Perhaps as a final thought, and I'm excited to talk to someone like you because I think what it does is it gives proof to a young African researcher, health innovator, perhaps, who's listening today, that wow, Tariro is from Zimbabwe. She studied on our continent, and yet she's doing things that's getting global recognition. What's your message to young health innovators, young African researchers about what is possible?
Yeah, I think my message is dream, be persistent, and whenever doors are shut, keep knocking on those doors. Because I think the more of us that are dreamers, and it's hard being an entrepreneur and a dreamer, but it's really important that we continue to knock on doors, keep doing the work, keep focusing on what's important for health on the continent. And it won't always be easy, but I think if enough of us do this, we'll lay the pathway to make it easier for the next generation coming behind us.
Dr. Tariro Makadzange, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Once again, congratulations on this recognition, Time 100 2026 Health list, and for your achievements and what you're doing with ACRN. Well done to you, and we are so proud of you on this continent.
Thank you, Peter. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.